Tywin Lannister sat alone in his war tent, staring at the map of Westeros. The war had cost him much his time, his gold, and his pride. Robb Stark, the so-called young wolf, had been winning battles again and again. He was young, but dangerous, clever, and Tywin hated nothing more than losing to a boy. His commanders had offered many plans, but none could trap the wolf. Until now. Tywin stood slowly, his golden armor shining under the lantern light. He had made up his mind. He would use something that Robb would never ignore. Something even the honorable Stark couldn't resist. He would use Joffrey. Of course, Joffrey was a problem, loud, cruel, and unpredictable. But he was still the king, or at least the one sitting on the Iron Throne. More importantly, he was a Lannister. If news spread that the king had been taken by rebels or abandoned near enemy lands, Robb Stark would see it as a chance, a trap hidden in a gift. So Tywin set the plan into motion. He sent word to the north through secret channels, letters written in the hand of a frightened servant, claiming that King Joffrey had run away from King's Landing, scared after an argument with Queen Cersei. The letter said he was traveling through the Riverlands with only a few guards, hoping to hide in Casterly Rock until the war was over. It was a lie, of course. Joffrey had not run. He had been sent, drugged, locked in a cart, and sent into enemy territory, dressed as a fleeing king, with enough gold and noise to attract attention. Robb Stark was in Riverrun when the message arrived. At first, he didn't believe it. It smelled like a trick. But as more whispers came in, more small folk talking about seeing the young king on the roads, his council began to doubt. Catelyn Stark was furious. "You cannot chase after Joffrey," she warned Robb. "He is not worth it. He killed your father. He is poison." "But he is the king," Robb replied. "If I capture him alive, I could trade him for Sansa, for Arya. Maybe even end the war." His bannermen were divided. Some agreed with Lady Catelyn. Others, hungry for victory, begged him to go after Joffrey. After all, what kind of king runs from war? In the end, Robb made the decision. He would ride out with a small force to capture the false king. He would not risk his entire army. Just enough to strike fast, take the boy, and return before the Lannisters noticed. But the Lannisters were watching. Tywin had placed eyes on every road, spies hidden in villages and woods. And deeper in the shadows, Sir Gregor Clegane the Mountain waited, thirsty for blood. Joffrey, meanwhile, had finally woken up, tied in a soft cart, with fine food and wine, guarded by silent soldiers who answered only to Tywin. He screamed, cursed, and demanded to be released. But the guards said nothing. "Do you know who I am?" Joffrey shrieked. "I am the king. I'll have your heads on spikes." No one answered. Only the trees and wind replied. Far to the north, Robb and his men moved quickly. He had grey wind by his side, sniffing the air for danger. As they rode toward the last reported location of Joffrey, Robb felt uneasy. Something didn't feel right. The roads were too quiet, the villages too silent, even the birds had flown away. But he couldn't stop now. Not when the man who ordered his father's death was within reach. His heart burned with the hope of justice and the pain of revenge. He didn't know that Tywin was already one step ahead. The trap was ready. The wolf was walking straight into the lion's mouth. The sun began to sink behind the trees as Robb Stark and his small force rode through the dense woods of the Riverlands. Grey wind trotted beside his horse, alert and silent, ears twitching at every sound. The scouts had returned earlier that morning, claiming they saw a golden carriage 2 miles east, guarded by red-cloaked soldiers, and inside it a boy wearing a crown. Robb's jaw tightened. It had to be Joffrey. "I want him alive," Robb told his men. "No blood, unless you must. He stands trial in the north." His bannermen nodded. though some, like Lord Karstark, couldn't hide their thirst for revenge. The memory of Ned Stark's beheading still haunted them all. Taking Joffrey alive was a noble plan, but not everyone believed in mercy. "We should just kill the little monster and be done with it," Karstark whispered to one of his sons. But Robb didn't hear it. His focus was locked on the plan. They would strike at first light, surround the Lannister party, and take the boy before Tywin even knew he was gone. What Robb didn't know was that Tywin already knew everything. Back in the Lannister camp, Tywin stood over another map, this one marked not with cities, but with Robb's expected paths. He had predicted where Robb would go, what forest he would hide in, and even how many men he'd take. "You know him well," said Sir Kevan, Tywin's brother. Tywin gave a cold smile. "He's young, brave, yes, but foolish. He believes he can outplay me. That will be his last mistake." "What about Joffrey?" Kevan asked. Tywin's face grew darker. "That boy is a stain on our name. Let him scream. He serves his purpose now." At that moment, far away in the woods, Joffrey was screaming. Two of the guards had just tied his hands after he tried to stab one with a fork. He ranted, spat, and kicked, but no one reacted. These were not ordinary Lannister men. These were sellswords paid to deliver a package, not protect a king. "You'll all die for this," Joffrey howled. "I'll have your families fed to dogs. A sharp slap across his face silenced him. "We don't work for you, boy," the guard said coldly. "We work for gold." Joffrey's lip trembled, but he didn't speak again. By nightfall, Robb's party had reached the edge of the glade. Hidden among the trees, they could see the glowing light of the campfire, the golden carriage, and 4 guards standing lazily by. It looked too easy. "Something's wrong," Grey Wind growled low, pacing nervously. Robb hesitated. "We move in groups. Quiet. Surround them. I'll take the boy." As his men moved into position, bows drawn and swords ready, Robb led Grey Wind and 2 others toward the carriage. The guards didn't notice them at first, or pretended not to. That's when it happened. A whistle split the silence. Suddenly, the glade exploded with movement. Dozens of Lannister soldiers hidden in the darkness rose from the grass like ghosts, crossbows raised. A flaming arrow shot into the air, lighting the sky red. Robb shouted, "Ambush!" Arrows flew like rain. Men screamed, horses panicked. Grey Wind leapt into battle, tearing into a soldier's neck, but there were too many. Robb swung his sword and cut down one attacker, then another, but the numbers were overwhelming. They had walked straight into Tywin's trap. From behind the carriage, a monstrous figure emerged. Sir Gregor Clegane the Mountain, taller than any man, his greatsword dripping with blood. He saw Robb and roared like a beast. Robb's men fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Karstark's sons fell trying to protect their lord. One of Robb's bannermen tried to flee, but was shot through the neck with an arrow. And in the middle of it all, Joffrey was still in the carriage, laughing. "Kill them all!" he shouted, thrilled by the chaos. "Kill the traitors! I want their heads!" Robb managed to rally a few of his remaining soldiers and break through the line. Grey Wind fought beside him like a shadow, his white fur soaked in red. They retreated into the trees, wounded, broken but alive. That night, as they escaped under the cover of darkness, Robb looked back at the fire-filled glade, smoke rising like a warning. Tywin had beaten him, not in battle but in the mind. He had risked his own grandson to strike at the heart of the North, and it had worked. But Robb was not dead, and this war was not over. Rain fell softly through the trees as Robb Stark limped into the shadows of a small, abandoned mill. His sword hung loose in his hand, stained with the blood of men he didn't even know the names of. Behind him, only 12 men remained. They had left with 50. Grey Wind lay beside the door, wounded but alive, licking a deep gash on his leg. The dire wolf's eyes were sharp, full of pain, but still protective. He hadn't left Robb's side, not even for a moment. Robb sat down on a broken bench, silent. His hands trembled, though not from fear. It was rage, deep, cold rage. The kind that didn't scream, it waited, burned quietly. Lord Karstark stood over him, one arm bloodied, his face wild. "This was madness," he said. "You risked your life and mine for that Lannister brat." Robb didn't look up. "I thought we could use him. Bargain with him." Karstark spat on the floor. "You thought wrong. And now my sons are dead, both of them. For what? A spoiled boy who should have been strangled in the cradle?" The words struck like knives, but Robb didn't argue. He couldn't. He had led them into a trap, his choice, his burden. Another man entered the mill, Maegor Mormont, bruised and dripping wet. "Scouts say Lannister riders are still searching the woods. We need to move, Robb. Now." Robb finally stood. "We head north. Avoid the roads. No fires, no signals. We disappear." As they packed up, the silence between the survivors was louder than words. Grief hung heavy. Every man there had lost friends, brothers, or kin in the ambush. And in the middle of it all, Joffrey was still alive, returned to Tywin's camp as if nothing had happened. In the Lannister camp, Joffrey strutted around like he had won the war himself. "I was bait," he said proudly to anyone who would listen, "and they fell for it like stupid dogs chasing a bone." He laughed loudly, sipping wine, while a servant dabbed at the small bruise on his cheek. He had demanded a crown to wear again, and Tywin had given it to him just to keep him quiet. But the truth was, Tywin had no love left for Joffrey. He barely looked at him anymore. "He survived," Sir Kevan said quietly that evening, "by some miracle." "Unfortunately," Tywin replied without emotion. "Joffrey was a weapon, but a reckless one. Tywin knew it. The boy had no control, no patience, and now he had tasted blood. That made him even more dangerous. But the victory had been worth it. They had shattered Robb Stark's confidence, made him doubt himself. That was more powerful than killing him. "Send the ravens," Tywin ordered. "Spread the word that Robb Stark fled like a coward, that the young wolf has no teeth." Kevan raised an eyebrow. "But that's not true. He fought well, escaped with—" Tywin turned his cold eyes on him. "Truth doesn't win wars. Fear does." Back in the north, word of the ambush reached Catelyn Stark at River Run. She dropped the goblet from her hand when she heard the news. "How many did he lose?" she asked the messenger. "Nearly 40, my lady. He lives, but barely." Catelyn felt the air leave her lungs. Her boy, her last son, fighting, and he had walked straight into the lion's trap because of Joffrey. She went to the Godswood that night and prayed to the old gods, even as she doubted they were listening. "What good is honor when it leads us to graves?" she whispered. "What good is war if it only gives us silence?" Robb and his remaining men moved through the woods for days. He said little, slept less. Every sound at night made him reach for his sword. Every face reminded him of someone he couldn't save. One night, as they camped near a stream, Grey Wind growled again, low and warning. Robb turned, sword drawn. A single rider approached. But it wasn't a Lannister. It was Roose Bolton. He had come from Harrenhal, bringing news and something worse. "The war is changing," Bolton said softly. "Your Uncle Edmure lost ground in the west, and Walder Frey is demanding answers. He wants your word, your loyalty, and a marriage soon." Robb's heart sank. A marriage. Another alliance. Another trap. He was beginning to learn the truth his father never taught him. In war, the sword kills bodies, but promises, they kill kingdoms. The campfire flickered low as Robb stared into the flames, the crackle of burning wood the only sound in the quiet forest. Around him, his remaining men rested uneasily. The wounds from Tywin's ambush were not just on their bodies, but deep in their hearts. He held a bloodied rag against his arm, the cut still raw. But pain didn't bother him. Not anymore. It was the weight of failure that hurt more than any wound. Roose Bolton sat across from him, quiet as ever, his pale face expressionless in the firelight. "You trusted the word of a Lannister," Bolton said finally. "That was your mistake." Robb looked up sharply. "I trusted my duty, my people, my family." Bolton gave a slow, empty smile. "Your family is dying, your men are dying. But the Lannisters, they're multiplying. We cannot win this war with honor alone, my lord." Robb didn't reply, not because he agreed, but because he wasn't sure if Bolton was wrong. The trap had shaken him. Joffrey had been the perfect bait, too tempting to ignore. And now, the whole realm was laughing at the young wolf who chased a crown and lost half his pack. As the night deepened, Bolton handed him a sealed scroll. "From Lord Walder Frey," he said. "He demands your presence." And an answer. Robb took the scroll and opened it. The words inside were short, cold, and full of venom. "You promised one of mine your hand. You broke it. Now I wonder if your word means anything at all." Walder Frey had agreed to support Robb early in the war, on one condition, that Robb marry one of his daughters. But that promise had been shattered the moment Robb met Talisa, a healer from Volantis who had saved his life and stolen his heart. Now, that love was becoming a weapon in someone else's hand. "He wants me to apologize," Robb said bitterly. "To crawl back, marry a Frey girl, and pretend none of this happened. Or risk losing the twins," Bolton said flatly, "and every crossing between the north and the south. Without Frey's bridges, you're trapped." Robb clenched his fists. "I will not marry for politics." "You already did," Bolton replied, his voice colder now. "Just not the right politics." In King's Landing, Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, legs crossed, tossing grapes into a servant's mouth just for amusement. His survival after the ambush had made him bolder, nastier. He told the court he had lured the young wolf into the trap personally, even though Tywin had ordered the whole plan without telling him anything. "They say Stark ran like a dog," Joffrey sneered. "I should send him a collar." Sansa, sitting silently at the side of the hall, felt her stomach twist. Every word from Joffrey's mouth was poison, and yet the people laughed. The courtiers bowed, the lords clapped. They feared him now more than ever. But Tywin, seated just below the throne, didn't even look up from his papers. He let Joffrey talk and make noise, but he kept the true power in his own hands. Later that evening, behind closed doors, Cersei confronted her father. "You used my son like a pawn," she said through clenched teeth. "You risked his life." Tywin barely glanced at her. "I risked less than if I had let him keep ruling unchecked. He's the king." "No," Tywin said calmly. "I am the king as long as he sits and talks, and I make the decisions." Cersei said nothing. She had no real power. Not anymore. Back in the north, Robb sat with Catelyn in River-run Solar. His mother looked older now, the war carving lines into her face, her eyes dimmer with every death. "You must talk to Walder Frey," she said. "We cannot afford more enemies." "Not now." Robb shook his head. "I married for love. And how many men died for that love?" The silence was bitter. At that moment, Talisa entered, her presence soft and graceful. She placed a hand on Robb's shoulder, and he covered it with his own. His heart wanted her, needed her, but his crown wanted something else. "I'll go to the twins," Robb said at last. "I'll speak with Lord Frey. Perhaps there's still a way to make peace." But as the words left his mouth, A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just the cold winds of the north. It was something deeper. A shadow was growing. Around him, behind him, inside his very court. Roose Bolton had not returned to Harrenhal, and the smile he wore now was the kind that didn't reach the eyes. The road to the twins was long, cold, and full of whispers. Every camp Robb passed, every village he rode through, every soldier he spoke to carried the same unsettled air. The Northmen still respected him, loved him, but something had broken since the ambush. Trust. Not trust in him as a man, but trust in him as a king. Robb felt it every time he raised his eyes and met theirs. He rode ahead with Talisa, Grey Wind, his mother, and a few dozen guards. The rest of his army followed at a distance, slower due to wounds and lack of supplies. The riverlands had been burned by the mountains' raids. Food was scarce, morale was even scarcer. Talisa rode closer, her horse brushing gently against Robb's. "You're quiet today," she said softly. Robb forced a smile. "Just thinking." "About Lord Frey?" He sighed. "About everything, the war, my men, my choices, my mistakes." Talisa touched his hand. "You're doing your best, Robb. You're a good man." "A good man doesn't send his men to die in a trap," he whispered. She squeezed his hand, but said nothing. Some wounds didn't have bandages. Behind them, Catelyn Stark watched quietly. She saw the way her son carried pain in his shoulders, how much weight rested on him. But she also saw something else, a shadow she couldn't name. Roose Bolton rode beside her, silent as always, his pale eyes almost thoughtful, like a man studying pieces on a board. "You've been quiet for hours," Catelyn said. Bolton turned to her slowly. "I prefer to study before I speak." "Study what?" "People. Their choices, their weaknesses." Catelyn frowned. "You sound like a man planning betrayal." Bolton didn't smile. "Betrayal is a matter of perspective, my lady. Some call it survival." Before she could respond, he rode ahead. At the twins, Walder Frey waited like a hungry wolf. He sat on his throne of carved wood, his many children and grandchildren gathered around him like crows waiting for scraps. His nose twitched, his lips curled, his fingers tapped the armrest impatiently. "The young wolf comes crawling home," he chuckled. "Let's see how low he bows." Lothar Frey leaned forward. "He must be desperate to come here after breaking your promise." "And desperate men," Walder said with a grin, "are the easiest to crush." But even as he spoke, another guest arrived quietly, one who had not been expected. Roose Bolton. He approached the twins at dawn, his cloak white with frost, his eyes unreadable. Walder Frey greeted him personally. "I didn't invite you." "You didn't need to," Bolton replied. "I come with an opportunity." Lord Frey raised a brow. "For you or for me?" "For both of us," Bolton whispered. "Tywin Lannister sends his regards." Walder's grin widened. "Now we're talking." On the road, Robb's scouts spotted smoke in the distance, the towers of the twins standing tall at the river crossing. Robb felt a tightness in his chest. He wasn't afraid of Walder Frey. He was afraid of what his pride and his choices had created. As they approached, the doors opened. Walder Frey stood at the entrance, arms wide. "King Robb, welcome back," his voice dripped with false warmth. "We've prepared a feast for forgiveness and for the future." Robb dismounted and bowed not deeply, but enough to show respect. "My lord, I come in peace." "And you shall have peace," Walder said, smiling with all his yellow teeth. "Come, come, bring your mother, bring your pretty wife. There is much to talk about." Talisa stiffened at the words. "Pretty wife." But Robb squeezed her hand reassuringly. Inside the hall, music played. Food was served. Wine flowed. Laughter echoed through the stones, but it all felt wrong, too forced, too eager. Robb tried to ignore the feeling, but Grey Wind didn't. The direwolf paced restlessly outside the hall, snarling at the Frey guards who tried to approach. Robb had wanted him inside, but Walder insisted the wolf was too dangerous. "A beast should eat with beasts," Walder had said. Catelyn watched the hall carefully. Every Frey smile was too sharp, every toast too loud, every glance too calculated. And then her eyes landed on something chilling. Roose Bolton. He was seated comfortably at a Frey table, drinking wine with one of Walder's sons. Not with the North, not with Robb, not with the River Lords, with the Freys. Catelyn felt a coldness spread through her body. She leaned in toward Robb. "Something is wrong." Robb looked around, uneasy. "What do you mean?" "Roose is sitting with Freys, and he hasn't looked at you once." Before he could answer, Walder Frey stood, lifting his cup. "A toast," he cried, "to new alliances and old mistakes." Laughter filled the hall. And behind the laughter, behind the music, behind the warmth of the fire, a door quietly locked, steel quietly unsheathed. And the trap Tywin Lannister set weeks ago finally closed. The music inside the hall shifted. The cheerful tune slowed, turning sharp and cold like a knife dragged across stone. Robb didn't notice at first. He was tired, frustrated, and forcing himself to act polite in a room full of enemies who smiled too widely. But Catelyn noticed. Her fingers closed around the edge of the table as she looked again at Roose Bolton. He sat still, calm, hands folded neatly in his lap, eyes unreadable. He didn't drink, didn't laugh, didn't blink. A man waiting for a signal. Walder Frey lifted his cup again, his voice rasping with fake sweetness. "My lords, to King Robb, may he forgive an old man's anger." Some of the Freys chuckled. A few snorted. One of the girls smirked while pouring wine. Talisa leaned toward Robb. "This place feels wrong," she whispered. "I feel watched." "You are," Catelyn murmured. "We all are." The doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. One of the Frey sons nodded at the musicians. And then the music stopped. Silence filled the hall, thick and suffocating. Catelyn's heart began to pound. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on something horrifying. The doors weren't just closed. They had been barred from outside. She stood up slowly. "Robb." He looked up at her, confused. "Mother?" Catelyn's breath caught in her throat as she saw a glint of steel from behind a Frey cloak. "Robb, get down." She threw herself toward him, but the first arrow had already been fired. It struck one of Robb's bannermen in the throat. Blood sprayed across the table. Screams erupted instantly. The hall exploded into chaos as Frey soldiers dropped their disguises, pulling out crossbows hidden under their clothes. "No!" Robb shouted, reaching for Talisa. More arrows flew. More blood spilled. The feast turned into a slaughter. Grey Wind howled outside, clawing at the doors, trying to break through as Frey guards jabbed spears at him. He snapped at them wildly, desperate to reach his master. Inside, Robb grabbed Talisa's arm, pulling her closer. But a Frey soldier rushed forward and plunged a dagger into her side. She gasped, eyes wide, hands shaking. Blood spread across her dress like a blooming red flower. "Robb," she whispered. "No, no!" Robb screamed, catching her before she fell. Another dagger struck. Then another. Talisa's body slumped in his arms. Robb froze. His world collapsed in a single heartbeat. Catelyn screamed a raw, broken sound. "Stop. Stop this." She grabbed Lady Walder Frey, one of Walder's young wives, and held a knife to her throat. "Let my son go," she shouted. "Let him go, and she lives." But Walder Frye only smiled, his rotten teeth gleaming. "I have many wives." Catelyn felt something break inside her. She knew then it was over, all of it. Robb held Talisa's lifeless body, shaking, blood dripping from his fingers. His breath came out in painful gasps. His eyes were hollow. He didn't even fight when soldiers held him up. Across the room, Roose Bolton finally stood, brushing imaginary dust from his cloak. He walked slowly toward Robb, each step echoing like a funeral bell. "You lost the North when you chased the boy king," Bolton said quietly. "You lost your men when you followed your heart. And you lost this war the moment you trusted anyone." Robb looked up, but he felt nothing. The fire inside him had died. Roose leaned close. "The Lannisters send their regards." And he thrust his dagger straight into Robb's heart. Robb fell to his knees, collapsing beside Talisa. His final breath left him softly, almost peacefully, like a wolf lying down in winter. Catelyn screamed again, a scream so full of pain it shook the hall. The knife fell from her hand. She stared at her son's still body, her face empty. Walder Frey waved a hand lazily. "Kill her too." A blade flashed. Silence followed. Outside, grey wind fought until his last breath. Arrows pierced his body, spears tore into him, but he kept attacking, kept trying to reach Robb. When he finally fell, he died with his teeth bared, as if still protecting the boy he loved. Hours later, the twins were quiet, the fires dim, the floors washed with blood. Roose Bolton rode out into the night, heading back toward the south, toward Tywin, toward his new reward. The North had been broken. The young wolf had been slain. And Tywin Lannister, far away in King's Landing, received the raven at sunrise. He read the message slowly. Then he allowed himself a small, cold smile. Everything had unfolded exactly as planned. Because it all began the night he used Joffrey as bait. The bells in King's Landing rang louder than they had in years, not for mourning but for celebration. The young wolf is dead. Robb Stark is slain, his army crushed. The North has fallen. Crowds poured into the streets, drunk on wine and Lannister lies. Gold cloaks beat drums. Servants threw rose petals into the air. And children danced in circles, pretending to stab each other with sticks, yelling, "The North remembers nothing now." Inside the Red Keep, Joffrey Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, legs swinging like a child's, grinning wildly as the news was read aloud by Grand Maester Pycelle. Robb Stark, slain at the Twins, his direwolf killed, his mother, Lady Catelyn, murdered, his bannermen scattered. Joffrey clapped his hands. "I want his head brought here, mounted on a spike beside Ned Stark's. Let the North remember who rules them now." Tywin Lannister didn't flinch. He stood quietly below the throne, hands behind his back, his face unreadable. "You will do nothing of the sort," he said calmly. Joffrey blinked, confused. "I'm the king." "And a dead king is no king at all," Tywin replied coldly. "You will hold your tongue, and you will show restraint." Joffrey's face twisted. "Restraint? They killed Uncle Jaime. They betrayed the throne. Robb Stark was your enemy. Now he is ash. That should satisfy even your hunger for cruelty." But Joffrey leaned forward, voice sharp. "They didn't kill him. You did. You sent letters. Paid murderers. Used me like a worm on a hook." The hall fell silent. Even Cersei, seated nearby, shifted nervously. Tywin walked up the steps slowly. "You are my grandson, but you are not my equal. I built this kingdom while you were still drinking from your mother's breast." Joffrey stood, red-faced, but when Tywin's eyes locked onto his, he sat back down quickly, like a whipped dog. Cersei moved to calm the moment, forcing a smile. "It's a time for joy, not arguments." But there was no joy in Tywin's expression. He had won the war. The Starks were crushed. The Riverlands were broken. Yet he knew, a lion surrounded by cowards and fools does not sleep in peace. Roose Bolton had been rewarded with the title of Warden of the North. Walder Frey was now Lord Paramount of the Trident. Both were useful men, but not loyal men. Men who kill guests at weddings cannot be trusted to sleep under your roof. Still, for now, Tywin needed them. And for now, the realm believed the war was over. But the North was not dead. Not completely. In the forests beyond the Twins, ravens still flew, black wings carrying news to those who remembered. The Umbers, the Mormonts, the wild clans of the mountains, the broken men scattered across the snow. The North remembers, and what it remembered was murder. What it remembered was Red Wedding. Even in the cold, even in silence, something began to rise. At Castle Black, Jon Snow stood on the wall, snow falling across his shoulders as the Black Knight stretched out before him. A raven landed beside him, a scroll tied to its leg. He read the words slowly. His hands trembled by the time he finished. Robb was dead. His mother, too. The North in chaos. Sam came up beside him, face pale. Jon? Jon turned away from the wind. They killed them. All of them. Sam looked like he might cry. But how? Where? At a wedding, Jon said, under the laws of guest right. He looked out into the darkness again, voice low. They used my brother's heart to win their war. Far beyond the wall, something howled in the dark. Not a wolf, something colder, stronger. The world was changing again. In Braavos, Arya Stark sat on a merchant ship, silent as the wind rocked the boat gently. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She only stared at the coin in her palm, the one Jaqen H'ghar had given her. A coin of death. She had overheard the sailors whispering, "Robb Stark is dead." She didn't scream, didn't curse. She just said one name, Walder Frey, and then another, Roose Bolton, and another, Tywin Lannister. She repeated them like prayers, like weapons. She wasn't a little girl anymore. Not after this. Not after the wolves were slaughtered. Back in King's Landing, Tywin sat alone in his chambers that night, reading by candlelight. A knock came at the door. Sir Kevan entered, nervous. "Something troubling, brother?" Tywin didn't look up. Victory has a price, and this one was paid in poison. Kevan frowned. "You think people will turn against us?" "I know they will," Tywin said quietly. "But they'll wait." Kevan nodded. "And what of the boy king?" Tywin finally looked up. "Joffrey won us the war, by being the bait." He took a sip of wine, cold and bitter. "But I fear he may cost us the peace." Snow fell quietly on the ruins of a northern outpost, its walls broken and blackened by war. In the silence, a single direwolf pawprint appeared in the white frost, followed by another. Then came the sound of a sword being drawn not for ceremony, but for justice. The North was not dead. Not truly. They thought they had broken it. But a wolf doesn't die just because it bleeds. It hides, it waits, it watches, and then it bites. In the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton stood on his balcony, wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, drinking sour wine as he watched the snow drift across the land that now belonged to him. Warden of the North. It still sounded strange and dangerous. He had killed Robb Stark with his own hand, but the Northmen hadn't all submitted. Not truly. The Karstarks were restless. The Mormonts refused his summons. The Umbers obeyed, but coldly, too coldly. They had accepted him because of fear, not loyalty. And fear fades. Inside, his bastard son, Ramsay, flayed a servant alive just to hear him scream. Roose said nothing. Ramsay was cruel, but cruelty was a kind of weapon, one that sent a message. But it was a dangerous one. One day, even fear would turn into rebellion. At Winterfell, black banners no longer flew. The wolves had been driven out. But there were whispers in the wind servants who still said, "The boy with the broken legs lives." Some swore they'd seen Bran Stark. Others claimed Rickon was hiding in the woods with wild beasts. No one knew the truth. But rumors are more powerful than swords. They spread faster than fire. They make people hope. And hope, in a land of grief, is the most dangerous thing of all. Far across the sea, in the free city of Braavos, Arya Stark sat in the House of Black and White. She had learned to be quiet, to be invisible, to listen more than speak. But she had not forgotten who she was. Every night, she whispered her list. Walder Frey, Roose Bolton, Tywin Lannister. The faceless men taught her patience. They taught her to become no one. But deep inside her, there was still a girl with a name. A girl with a purpose. She didn't want gold. She wanted vengeance. And her time would come. In King's Landing, Joffrey's wedding was approaching. The capital buzzed with excitement. The streets were decorated, the nobles were arriving, and thousands of roses were being plucked for the royal tables. Joffrey was in his chambers, laughing as he watched a dwarf puppet perform a mockery of Robb Stark's death. He clapped like a child. "That's how he died," Joffrey laughed. "Make the wolf cry again." Tyrion stood beside him, stone-faced, wine untouched. He turned to his father later and said quietly, "You didn't just kill Robb Stark, you made him a martyr." Tywin didn't respond, but he felt it too. The cheers in the streets were loud, too loud, like a roar trying to silence the sound of something rising in the dark. And then, one morning, a body appeared at the gates of Harrenhal, flayed, dead, a Frey. Nailed to a wooden board with a simple message written in blood. "The North remembers." Then another appeared, this one strung from a tree, then a third with his tongue cut out. Lord Frey sent ravens to Roose Bolton, demanding answers. But Roose had none, because something was happening, something he couldn't see. The North wasn't fighting with armies anymore. It was fighting with ghosts. One night, a man entered the twins, posing as a bard. He was short, quiet, and polite. He played music well. No one noticed the strange hound he kept near him. No one asked why he never drank. That night, Walder Frey's youngest son was found dead in the wine cellar, poisoned. The bard had disappeared. And the song he played? It was one from the North, a Stark song. Tywin Lannister, now holding the realm together by force, began to lose sleep. His letters to the Freys went unanswered. Bolton's replies were colder than ever, and Joffrey, in his childish pride, ignored it all. He thought the war was over. He thought the North had been conquered. He thought there would be no price for turning weddings into graveyards. But Tywin knew better. He saw it coming, not in battles but in shadows, not in open war but in quiet revenge. Because the more they tried to bury the wolf, the louder it howled beneath the snow. The North remembers, and it was just beginning to bite back.